The air tasted of salt and diesel, a smell I usually found comforting. But not that night. That night, it was the smell of a cage. A thick rust-pocked chain was wrapped around the gate to my own Marina slip, held fast by a padlock the size of a fist. The metal gleamed with a smug finality under the single, buzzing security light. From the back seat of my truck came a thin, whistling sound. The sound of my daughter, Sarah, fighting for every breath. Her asthma wasn't just bad, it was the kind that could turn on a dime, and the nearest hospital was a 20-minute drive around the bay, or 5 minutes by boat straight across it. Every second counted. That's when they appeared, stepping out from the shadows like a bad dream. Karen and Sharon, the twin queens of our homeowners association. They were in their late 40s, identical down to the matching pink velour tracksuits and the imperious tilt of their heads. Karen held a phone up, its screen glowing in the dark. "Karen, you have to open this gate," I said, my voice tight. "It's Sarah. She can't breathe." Karen lowered her phone just enough to look at me over the top of it. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Jake. We've had numerous noise complaints. Your engine. The new Marina rules are very clear. Rules. I was a man who lived by rules. For 30 years, I was a harbor pilot, guiding supertankers the size of skyscrapers through channels you couldn't see. My life was a checklist of tides, drafts, and federal regulations. I understood rules. But this wasn't about rules. This was about power. She needs a hospital, Karen, now. Sharon, the silent partner, stepped forward. "Rules are for everyone's safety and comfort, Jake," she said, her voice a perfect echo of her sister's. "You should call 911, like everyone else." They had this way of looking at each other before they spoke, a silent two-person jury that had already reached its verdict. This is the kind of story you hear about, isn't it? The kind that makes you shake your head. And if you're watching Karenology, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. But when it's happening to you, when it's your kid in the back seat making that sound, you feel a kind of helpless rage that's hard to describe. Have you ever been in a situation where the rules just made no sense at all? Hanging around my neck, cold against my skin, was my old pair of Steiner binoculars. They aren't for bird watching. They're a piece of my past, a reminder of a squall in the shipping lane that nearly took a container ship, my partner, and me with it. We saved the ship, but my partner's leg was crushed. I've carried the weight of that day ever since. Those binoculars saw it all. And in that moment, looking at those two women in their ridiculous pink suits, I felt that same brand of powerlessness I felt on that ship's bridge, watching my friend go down. The pleading, the explaining, it was all useless. Something inside me just clicked off. The panic for Sarah was still there, a hot coal in my gut, but around it, a layer of ice was forming. I gave them one last look, no more words. I turned my back on them, on the locked gate, on my boat. The crunch of my boots on the gravel was the only sound besides Sarah's wheezing and the distant mocking chirp of crickets. If you've ever felt that switch flip, from hot panic to pure, cold focus, do me a favor and hit that like button, because that's exactly where I was, sprinting back to my truck. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew the game had just changed. Pleading was over. As I yanked open the truck door, I heard Karen's voice cut through the night, dripping with fake sweetness. "Oh, I'll be documenting this, Jake. Your non-compliance is going to be very, very expensive." Her breath returned to normal under the fluorescent lights of the emergency room. Sarah was going to be fine, but as I sat there watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, the cold focus inside me didn't thaw. It sharpened. That 20-minute drive around the bay, with every wheeze from the back seat echoing in my ears, had cost me something. It had burned away the part of me that was willing to let things slide. The next morning, I walked into the homeowners association office. It smelled of stale air conditioning and a chemical lemon scent that was supposed to pass for clean. Everything was beige and gray, from the carpet to the filing cabinets. It was the kind of room designed to make you feel tired, to drain the fight out of you before you even opened your mouth. On there they were, Karen and Sharon, sitting behind a large particle board desk. They looked up as I entered, their smiles identical and practiced. It was like they'd been waiting. "Jake," Karen said, her voice smooth as oil on water. "We're so glad Sarah is feeling better. We were very concerned." I didn't say anything. I just stood there, letting the silence hang in the air. Sharon pushed a thick 3-ring binder across the desk. It slid to a stop in front of me. We've taken the liberty of printing out the new community and Marina guidelines for you, to avoid any future misunderstandings. I opened the binder. It was nearly 300 pages of dense single-space text. My fingers, used to navigating worn nautical charts, flipped through the tabs. I was a man who understood regulations. I'd spent my life finding the lethal details hidden in the fine print. And I found it on page 87, section C, subsection 4, the Azure Harbor Ecological Mandate. It was beautifully written nonsense. It required every vessel to have an emissions certificate that, as far as I could tell, hadn't even been invented yet. It effectively outlawed any boat more than 2 years old. My boat, a reliable 15-year-old Grady White, was my lifeline. It was my weekend, my therapy, my escape, and now it was illegal. I looked up from the page. "This isn't legal," I said, keeping my voice level. "The Federal Navigation Servitude gives the public the right of access to navigable waters. You can't just invent a rule to block it." For the first time, Karen laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, like a piece of glass breaking. "Oh, Jake, you're not in federal waters here. This is a private marina. Our rules apply. It's for the good of the community." "And for your violation last night," Sharon added, tapping a freshly printed invoice on the desk, "and for your boat, which continues to be in violation, there will be a fine, $500. She paused, letting the number sink in. "Per day, effective immediately. $500 a day. It was an anchor, designed to pull me under so fast I wouldn't even have time to struggle. Have you ever been hit with a bill so absurd it feels like a physical blow? It's meant to paralyze you." I looked from the invoice to their 2 smiling faces. The game was clear now. This wasn't a fine. It was a ransom. They didn't want my money. They wanted me gone. I picked up the heavy binder, the weight of it a solid, undeniable thing in my hand. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just turned and walked out. The automatic door hissed shut behind me, cutting off the chemical lemon smell and the low hum of the air conditioner. I stood on the sidewalk in the bright morning sun, holding 300 pages of their weapon. But as I looked at it, I didn't feel defeated. I felt the ice inside me get a little thicker. An old harbor pilot saying came to mind. "You don't fight the storm, you use its own power to steer." And I stood there, letting the silence settle while I started charting my course. That binder became my Bible for the next 2 days. I sat at my kitchen table, the smell of burnt coffee in the air, highlighting sections, cross-referencing clauses, looking for the loophole. I was a logician, a man who believed that every problem had a solution if you just looked at the system diagram long enough. My plan was to find the contradictions, the procedural errors, and dismantle their argument piece by piece. It was a solid plan, a logical plan. And it was completely useless. Because by Wednesday morning, the war had moved to a new front. It was no longer about binders and clauses. I heard it before I saw it, a low, rhythmic chanting coming from the direction of the marina. I walked out my front door, and my blood ran cold. Lining the path to the docks was a group of about 20 people. They held professionally printed signs. "Save our water," "No more polluters," "Azure Harbor deserves better." They wore matching brand new t-shirts with a stylized logo of a wave. They weren't protesters. They were a performance. Leading them was a guy with a man bun and a $1,000 camera, filming a slick-looking man who was speaking with passionate, rehearsed sincerity. "We are a grassroots movement," the man declared to the camera, "dedicated to preserving the pristine beauty of this community. But people like Jake here," he pointed a dramatic finger in my direction, "with his old leaking boat, are threatening everything we hold dear." My neighbors were standing on their lawns, watching. Some looked confused, but others were nodding along, their faces hardening as they looked at me. The narrative was being written right in front of my eyes, and I wasn't the one holding the pen. I walked toward them, my hands open, trying to project calm. "My boat doesn't leak," I said, my voice getting lost in their chanting. "I can show you the maintenance records." The man with the camera swung it into my face. The leader stepped right up to me, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "We're not interested in your records, buddy. We're interested in justice." Then he turned back to his crowd, and they roared. I was an outcast on my own street. The stares from my neighbors felt like tiny needles. Think about that for a second. How do you fight a lie when it's wrapped in a noble cause? Defeated, I turned away and headed for the one place that felt like neutral territory, Marco's Bait and Tackle. The little shop was an institution, smelling of brine and old wood. Marco, a quiet man in his 70s with hands permanently stained by his trade, was sitting behind the counter, sharpening a fillet knife. He didn't look up when I came in. He just kept the blade moving against the stone, the soft scrape, scrape, scrape filling the quiet shop. He let me stand there for a full minute, gathering myself. "They're not from around here," he said finally, his eyes still on the blade. "I figured," I said, slumping against a display of fishing lures. "They came in here yesterday," Marco continued, not missing a stroke. "The leader bought a dozen bottles of water, some snacks." He paused, then looked up at me, his dark eyes sharp. "He paid with a brand new corporate card." I waited. "I saw the name on it," Marco said, wiping the blade clean with an oily rag. He held it up, letting it catch the light. Said Azure Horizons LLC. The name meant nothing to me, just 2 words. But the way Marco said it, the way he looked at me, it felt like he just handed me a key. I didn't know what lock it opened, but I knew it was important. A corporation. This wasn't some grassroots movement. This was organized. Someone was paying for the show. I thanked him and walked back out into the sun. The chanting was still going, a dull, hateful pulse in the air. But now it sounded different. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was a signal. The name echoed in my head, a ghost without a face. Azure Horizons. Who were they? And what in the hell did they want with my Marina? The protesters were a constant presence for the rest of the week, like a low-grade fever. But I had a name now, a thread to pull. I still believed in logic, in rules. I called an old friend from my port days, a maritime lawyer named Ben, and laid out the whole situation. He agreed the homeowners association rules were flimsy and the fines were extortion. We started building a case, preparing to file an injunction. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. I had a plan. I was back on the offensive. That hope lasted until Saturday night. I was in my garage, sorting through old paperwork. The smell of oil and sawdust, a familiar comfort. Sarah was at a friend's house for a sleepover. The house was quiet, too quiet. A sudden noise from the direction of the water snapped my head up. It wasn't a splash. It was a crunch. A sharp, sickening sound of something solid giving way. I grabbed a heavy mag light from the workbench and ran outside. The air was thick with the scent of low tide. The marina was dark, the single security light flickering erratically. I aimed my flashlight beam toward my slip, and my heart stopped. My boat, my beautiful Grady White, was listing heavily to one side, its bow dipping into the dark water. A huge, jagged hole had been smashed into the fiberglass hull just above the waterline. The damage was brutal, deliberate, and spray-painted in crude, dripping red letters across the side was a single phrase: nature's enemy. It wasn't just vandalism, it was an execution. They hadn't just attacked my property, they had destroyed the very thing at the center of the fight, my evidence, my reason for the lawsuit. It felt like watching a part of myself sink into the black water. I stood there for a long moment, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The cold, logical part of my brain was gone, replaced by a hollow, ringing emptiness. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, someone you thought was on your side? This felt worse. I had trusted the system. I had trusted that right and wrong were clear lines, that logic would prevail. The police came, of course. A young, tired-looking deputy took my statement, his pen scratching in his little notebook. He was sympathetic, but his eyes held a look I recognized. The look of a man who knew there was nothing he could do. No witnesses, no suspects, just my word against a phantom. The next morning, I had to call Ben. My voice felt disconnected, like it was coming from someone else. "They sank the boat, Ben." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him shuffling papers. Finally, he sighed. "Jake, I'm sorry, but this changes things. Without the boat as the subject of the dispute, our injunction loses its standing. The case is effectively moot." Moot, a small, neat legal word for dead. My plan, my lawsuit, my hope, all of it sunk along with my boat. Karen and Sharon sent a message to the community group chat, expressing their deepest sympathies for the unfortunate act of vandalism, while also reminding everyone of the importance of community vigilance against divisive elements. They were dancing on my boat's grave. That afternoon, I sat on the edge of the dock, staring at the red letters on the hull. Nature's enemy. The words mocked me. I felt a familiar crushing weight settle over me, the same weight I'd felt the day my partner's leg was caught in that winch. Powerless. A good man who followed the rules and still ended up watching something terrible happen. I felt broken. It seemed like the fight was over, and I had lost. For 2 days, I did nothing. The hollow feeling in my chest was a constant companion. I'd go through the motions, make coffee, check emails, answer Sarah's calls with a voice I hoped sounded normal. But the fight was gone. They had won. They'd found a way to operate outside the rules, and I was left with nothing but a sunken boat and a dead-end legal case. On the third night, I couldn't sleep. The image of those red letters haunted me. I found myself in my small home office, surrounded by nautical charts and tide tables, relics of a life that felt 1,000,000 miles away. On a whim, driven by a sleepless, desperate energy, I typed the name Marco had given me into my computer's search bar, Azure Horizons LLC. The first few results were generic: a shell corporation registered in Delaware, a virtual office address in Miami. It was a ghost. But then I added another search term, a Hail Mary pass from my old life: port logistics. And there it was, a single obscure hit from a trade publication 2 years ago. A small article about a massive logistics conglomerate, Omnicorp, being hit with a multi-million-dollar fine for illegally dumping industrial waste in Baltimore Harbor. The fine was based on the testimony of a key witness, a harbor pilot who had meticulously documented their ship's movements and waste disposal logs, proving they were faking their records. My name wasn't in the article, my testimony had been sealed, but I was that pilot. My heart started to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I kept digging. It took me another hour of navigating corporate ownership databases, but I found the link. Azure Horizons LLC was a wholly owned subsidiary of a real estate firm, which in turn was owned by a holding company, whose majority shareholder was Omnicorp. It all clicked into place, a horrifying, perfect piece of machinery. This wasn't about my boat's engine noise. This wasn't about a couple of power-hungry women in tracksuits. This was revenge. It was a targeted corporate-funded operation to dismantle my life because I had cost them millions. Karen and Sharon weren't the masterminds. They were just the hired help, the local face of a much larger, uglier beast. Their plan was brilliant in its cruelty. They weren't just trying to punish me. They were using my punishment to achieve another goal. I found a zoning application, filed quietly with the county a month ago by Azure Horizons. It was a proposal to redevelop the entire marina into an exclusive high-end yacht club, contingent on the area being declared an eco-revitalization zone. They were creating the problem, me, so they could sell the solution. And then I found the final piece, the money. Following a digital breadcrumb trail, I uncovered a series of wire transfers from an offshore account linked to Azure Horizons. The recipient? An entity called the Azure Harbor Legal Defense Fund. It was the war chest Karen was always bragging about, the one she used to intimidate residents with the threat of endless litigation. She wasn't just working for them. She was being paid through a slush fund designed to look like community money. Suddenly, a knock on my front door made me jump. It was late, almost midnight. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and was surprised to see one of the protesters. He was a young kid, maybe 20, the one I'd seen a couple of times without a sign, just standing at the back of the group. He looked scared. I opened the door. "Can I help you?" He wouldn't look me in the eye. He just shoved a small audio recorder into my hand. I can't be a part of this anymore," he stammered. "I'm a student. I just needed the money." He turned and ran off into the darkness before I could say a word. I went back inside and pressed play. The audio was muffled, but the voices were unmistakable. It was Karen instructing the protesters before their first appearance. "Your job is to be loud and annoying," her voice hissed from the tiny speaker. "He's stubborn. We need the whole community to turn on him. Make him the villain. Don't worry about the details. Our lawyers will handle anything that comes up. The fund is fully loaded." I stopped the recording. The fund. Their strength was their war chest. Their ability to outspend, to intimidate, to bleed their opponents dry in legal fees. But what if that fund wasn't a fortress? What if it was a glass jaw? My mind, trained to see the weak points in massive systems, started to turn. My boat was gone. The court was useless. But I was a harbor pilot. I didn't just navigate ships, I navigated choke points. And I had just found theirs. The next morning, the world looked different. The anger was still there, a low hum beneath the surface. But the hollow feeling was gone. It was replaced by a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a pilot with a destination. I spent the day on the phone, calling in favors from a life I thought I'd left behind. I spoke to port authority clerks, shipping dispatchers, and even a retired Coast Guard commander. I was no longer a resident fighting his homeowners association. I was a logistics expert tracking a hostile vessel. Karen and Sharon, meanwhile, were on a victory tour. They announced a grand community event for the following Saturday, a clean water charity auction to be held on the main pier. It was a masterstroke of public relations. They would raise money for their slush fund while cementing their image as saviors of the community. The invitations went out, promising champagne, a string quartet, and a chance to bid on luxury items, all in the name of a pristine azure harbor. It was their coronation, and it was the perfect stage for my countermove. I didn't need a lawyer, I didn't need a judge. I needed a single well-placed phone call. The key wasn't the homeowners association rules or the local ordinances. The key was the money. Omnicorp was using an offshore account to funnel money into a domestic nonprofit. It was classic money laundering, dressed up in a pink tracksuit. They were so arrogant, so sure of their power, that they got sloppy. Let me tell you something about the kind of people who run multi-billion-dollar corporations. They fear one thing more than lawsuits or bad press. They fear the quiet, anonymous agents from the U.S. Treasury Department, specifically FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. These are the people who can freeze your assets with a single keystroke, locking you out of your own empire while they investigate. They are the harbor pilots of the financial world. And I had a direct line to one of them, a man I'd helped put away a different group of corporate pirates years ago. The day of the auction arrived. It was a perfect sunny afternoon. The pier was decorated with white linens and blue ribbons. Well-dressed guests mingled, sipping champagne, their laughter tinkling over the gentle sound of the string quartet. Karen and Sharon were in their element, gliding through the crowd, accepting praise. They had never looked more powerful. I stood at the far end of the parking lot, out of sight, my old Steiner binoculars around my neck. I wasn't watching the party, I was watching them. I saw the caterers, the musicians, the rental company staff, all of them small businesses, expecting to be paid at the end of the day. At precisely 3:15 p.m., just as Karen took the microphone to welcome her guests and begin the bidding, I made my call. I gave my contact the account number for the Azure Harbor Legal Defense Fund. I gave him the name of the offshore shell company. I gave him the docket number of the Omnicorp environmental case. I didn't have to explain the connection. He saw it in seconds. "Is this actionable?" I asked. "Oh, it's more than actionable, Jake," he said, and I could almost hear him smile. "This is a gift. Give me 5 minutes." I raised my binoculars. Through the lenses, I saw Karen, radiant under the afternoon sun, her voice amplified by the speakers. "Our first item today is a week-long stay at a 5-star resort in..." She never finished the sentence. Her phone, sitting on the lectern, began to buzz. Then Sharon's phone, in her hand, buzzed too. I saw them exchange a confused glance. Karen ignored it, trying to continue, but her phone buzzed again, insistently. Annoyed, she picked it up. And I watched through the powerful German glass of my binoculars as the blood drained from her face. Through my binoculars, the entire scene played out in silent, beautiful slow motion. Karen's smile froze, then collapsed. She stared at her phone, her knuckles white. Sharon rushed to her side, and I watched her face go through the same stages of confusion, then dawning horror. The string quartet, sensing something was wrong, faltered and stopped playing. The cheerful chatter of the crowd died down, replaced by a confused murmur. What was happening was invisible, but its effect was catastrophic. The credit card linked to their fully loaded fund had just been declined. Their accounts were frozen. The fortress was a house of cards, and a digital wind had just blown it all away. The first domino to fall was the catering manager. I saw him approach Karen, his face a mask of professional concern. She waved him away, but he was persistent. The conversation was short. He turned, spoke into his walkie-talkie, and his staff began to methodically pack up the food. clearing away the champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. And next were the musicians. Their leader had a brief, tense exchange with a panicked-looking Sharon. He shrugged, tapped his sheet music, and his quartet began packing their instruments. The silence they left behind was louder than any music. The guests were looking around now, bewildered. The party was literally disappearing around them. The man from the rental company, responsible for the tables, chairs, and linens, was on the phone, his expression growing more thunderous by the second. I lowered my binoculars. I didn't need them anymore. I had seen enough. It was a perfect, silent, systemic collapse. No shouting, no accusations. Just the quiet, relentless logic of a system shutting down. They hadn't just lost their money, they had lost their power in front of the very people they were trying to impress. Their humiliation was total and public. I walked away. There was nothing more to see. The fallout was swift. Federal agents, not the local sheriff, showed up at Karen and Sharon's houses the next day. The investigation into Omnicorp was reopened, this time with a money laundering charge attached. The story of the eco-charity that was actually a corporate revenge scheme became the talk of the town, then the county. The homeowners association was disbanded in disgrace. A few weeks later, a group of neighbors, the same ones who had stared at me with suspicion, came to my door. They asked me to lead the formation of a new, fair community board. They said I was the only one they could trust. And here's the thing, I said no. What would you do? After a fight like that, would you want to be the one in charge? I didn't. I hadn't done it for them. I'd done it for me, for Sarah, for the memory of my friend, and for the simple, stubborn belief that some lines shouldn't be crossed. The war was over, but it had left a scar. It had shown me a rottenness in the world I couldn't unsee. I sold what was left of my boat to Marco for $1. With the money I would have spent on lawyers, I bought 2 tickets for a whale-watching tour off the coast of Maine for me and Sarah. A month later, I stood on the deck of that tour boat, the cold spray on my face, a fresh sea breeze filling my lungs. Sarah was beside me, laughing, her face full of wonder. I raised my old Steiner binoculars to my eyes. But I wasn't looking for threats or channel markers anymore. I was watching a humpback whale breach, its massive body exploding from the water in a shower of silver spray. I didn't get my Marina slip back. I didn't get my boat back. But as I watched that whale disappear back into the deep blue, I realized I had gotten something far more valuable. I had gotten my peace back, and some things you just can't put a price on. If you've been on a journey like this and finally found your own peace, let me know in the comments. I'd like to hear about it.